communicated heavily through honors college, but I don't know.
Okay, so we're gonna do is we're gonna double take this so we stay this into where
You got it high up there. I have to take it down. Good evening, everyone. I am Galit Gertzenzon. Some of you know me as the Honors College professor, but I'm also the director of the Jewish Studies here at Ball State. And first of all, I just want to thank you all for being here. It is so heartwarming to see so many of you here. I know a lot of you came for Professor Blackwell, you're his students. And it's nice to see familiar faces coming out of town and from Muncie. So it's just really wonderful to have you all. And we hope that you can, in the future, attend more of our events. We have a semester full of events. Next, in just a few weeks, in March, this is probably the time to write this down for yourself. March 16th, we will have a lecture given by Professor Catherine Ludwig from the English department, and she will be speaking about reading gaps in the Midrash. About 10 days afterwards, on the 29th, I will be joining several faculty members from the School of Music, and we will have a wonderful selection of music by Jewish composers performed in Sursa Hall. Again, this is March 29th at 7:30. Catherine Ludwig's lecture will be taking place at this very room at the same time, 7:30. And on the 30th, we are having a guest coming from New York. This is Miriam Friedman Morris. She is a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, David Friedman, who was a wonderful painter, a visual artist, graphic designer, and she will tell his story of survival through the Holocaust and how he used art to tell his story of survival and imprisonment. So before I introduce Professor Blackwell, I just want to say a few things about the Ziegler Fund. We are very fortunate to have the Benjamin and Bessie Ziegler Fund. This was a couple that lived and had several generations of children here in the Delaware County. And it is thanks to their generosity we have this program here. Thanks to the endowment that they gave several decades ago, we are able to bring Professor Blackwell to give lectures, concerts, a workshop every summer. And I just cannot thank them enough for this generous gift. And so a few words about Professor Blackwell, who many of you know. Brent Blackwell is an interdisciplinary Holocaust scholar who focuses on the intersections between the humanities and the sciences, particularly in the areas of physics and mathematics. He has presented his work at many national and international conferences and has had his work published in academic journals like Reconstruction. And I know that those of you taking classes with him just adore him, so I'm so looking forward to hear your lecture. And without further ado, Professor Blackwell.
Thank you. All right, is this going through the mic? Okay. Let's see, a couple of introductory remarks. These speeches are kind of hard to give because they're supposed to be for the public, but yet I'm supposed to be academic. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to try and make it as informal as I can, but I know the professor button's going to kick on a couple times. Another thing is, I'm sure all of you will agree with me, it's unfortunate. We need to see more Y chromosomes in this room, especially for a topic like this. So I want to thank all the Y chromosomes that are here, right? We're outnumbered like 100 to 1, but we've got to get more people in this discussion. Okay. Make sure that's on. All right. In December of last year, Marion County Superior Court Judge Heather Welch blocked America's abortion ban after Hoosier Jews for Choice and 5 individual women joined with the Indiana ACLU to file a joint lawsuit challenging the trigger law under Indiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This, of course, came on the heels of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which was signed into law 24 June 2022. That same day, Rabbi Jill Jacobs wrote, quote, "Reproductive freedom is a Jewish value. According to Jewish law, abortion is not only permitted in at least some circumstances, but even required if the life of the pregnant person is at risk. Today's ruling ignores the First Amendment right for Jews to practice their religion without government interference, and will also have life-threatening implications for millions of Americans, primarily low-income people of color, by giving states the power to revoke essential health care from nearly half the population." End quote. Her article is the source for part of my title, along with the lawsuit filed by the ACLU. Also in the lawsuit, the ACLU of Indiana declares that, quote, "Although some religions believe that human life begins at conception, this is not an opinion shared by all religions or all religious people." Such a statement really perked my professor ears and got me all excited about giving a talk like this. My guess is that the average BSU student might find such a statement kind of strange. And to be sure, after COVID, the idea of average anything is pretty much thrown out the window. But it gives me this opportunity to not only raise this question on Ball State's campus, but a chance to offer an often unheard argument for reproductive freedom from one of the world's oldest active religions. This lecture will discuss the Jewish view on abortion. But as such, I need to lay out some ground rules so that no one mistakes my intent or misconstrues my biases. First off, I'm not Jewish. I study Jewish culture, history, and religion the way, say, my colleague Adam Beach studies comparative slavery in the early modern world, or the way that Jim Olson in biology studies how TL1 transcription factor plays a significant role in the progression of T-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, whatever that is. Professors are the first deep divers, really. We were jumping down rabbit holes long before YouTube or Reddit, and we chased these rabbits with the passion of maybe a religious zealot or a secular conspiracy theorist. My favorite rabbit hole just happens to be Judaism. I love Judaism. I love their history, their religion, their literature. I love their languages, the music, the art. I love their, well, I really don't love their food. I've got to be honest. I try, right? Most of it's really good, but gefilte fish, I make the case that unless you were raised on that, trying to convert to that later in life is like petting a cat backwards. Just not going to go well, right? So this leads me to my first ground rule. While I love Jewish culture, and I also love many individual Jews, I don't presume to speak for or on the behalf of any of them. I just speak as an academic who knows a lot about Jews and their culture, which leads me to my second ground rule. Though we necessarily generalize when we speak of any culture's quote-unquote beliefs on anything, it's important to also point out that people are people. Individual Jews have as many different beliefs on abortion as Christians or Goths or libertarians or bronies. People believe what they believe, which may or may not be based on anything. Beliefs just are. The Jewish view on abortion has nothing to do with belief. So let's leave beliefs out of this. I'm not going to tell you what the Jewish belief is on abortion because that would vary based on which Jew I asked. Instead, I'm going to provide you with the Jewish perspective on abortion, what it is and what it means to them, not any one Jew's personal belief about it. Because Judaism is a culture, not just a religion. There are many different kinds of Jews, just like there are many different kinds of Christians. Some Jews are highly religious and attend temple every week. Some Jews have never set foot in a temple. Some Jews speak Hebrew, some of them speak Yiddish, some can't understand a word of those languages. But are they all Jewish? Absolutely. They're Jewish because they're culturally Jewish. Every culture is like Baskin-Robbins, at least 31 different flavors. Jewish opinion has a long and detailed history that can be mapped with striking precision. You just have to know where to look for it and where it is. For the Jews, this opinion is intimately linked with their past. Now, unfortunately, in order to explain Jewish opinion on abortion, I have to give a little mini lesson on Jewish religious texts. I'm a teacher, sue me. So the Jewish religion has lots of texts, and by lots, I mean, well, even Jews really don't have a sense of what lots kind of means in this context. All right? The most important of these texts, the big boy that started it all, is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Most people know these 5 books by the names of Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. The books are the word of God dictated to Moses himself. When they're combined with the writings of all the other prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, which are called the Nevi'im, and the historical writings like the books of Kings and Judges, called the Ketuvim, they make up the Tanakh, which is a word that doesn't mean anything in Hebrew. It's just an acronym for the 3 books that we just talked about, right? Though their order is different, this is what Christians, unfortunately, call the Old Testament. But Hebrew religious texts only start here. After this comes the Talmud. Give us a sense here. Also called the Oral Torah. You see, as the Jews see it, even though God narrated the words of Torah to Moses, he also had to explain what the heck it all meant. For example, Numbers 15:38 says, "You are to make tassels on the corner of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel." Which is all good and well, but what the hell does that mean? The Talmud is the written record of all the explanations God gave to Moses, which he passed down orally to his fellow Levites and so on down the priestly line until thousands of years later, they finally wrote it all down in the 63 volumes of the Talmud. Right? And broken into 2 main parts. The oldest is the Mishnah, the part the earliest rabbis wrote down, a sort of like running oral commentary on the Bible. The other part is the Gemara, the commentary on that commentary written by later rabbis. You see how this is going to go, right? And while this may seem quite extensive, realize we're only to 400 CE, before Rome even fell, right? So, a few hundred years after Rome fell, the Jews realized that not every one of them necessarily had the time to read all 63 volumes of the Talmud. Go figure. So later rabbis wrote down what we call law codes. Think of these as sort of abridged versions of the Talmud that can be carried around and read by everyday Jews who want to know how they should live their lives. And there are more of these law codes than there are volumes of the Talmud. Here's one I brought with me. The Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Kitzer means little. Little in size, not little in scope, right? So, these rabbis updated the laws to better fit in with the lives of the modern Jew. And by modern Jew here, I mean the 16th century, right? These law codes, like the Shulchan Aruch, lay out in painstaking detail how a religiously observant Jew, because remember, not all Jews are observant, should prepare their food and wash their body, to what kind of clothes they should wear, and even how to carry them when they travel. These law codes are where we find most of the opinions on abortion. There we go. But just to finish out the little mini lesson, since these law codes only get us to the time of Shakespeare, they still need updating from time to time, especially when we invent new things like automobiles or cell phones. This is where the responsa come in. The responsa are the rabbi's answers to questions posed to them by everyday Jews on matters not covered in the law codes. For example, the law codes don't touch anything like Velcro, since we didn't have Velcro in the 16th century. This is what the responsa are for. Don't know if using an LED flashlight violates the laws of the Sabbath? Just ask your rabbi, and she'll consult the responsa. And it does, by the way. No. Now, abortion is a topic like any other in all these Jewish books. You can trace it all the way back to Moses and his chisel. So let's begin there. For Judaism, God has the answer to everything, and it's in the Torah. For our purposes, let's look at the question of when life begins, which is right there in the Torah, which is nice, certainly, but not the whole story. You see, what it means is completely up to 5,000 years of rabbinical interpretation, which Jews are free to take or leave. So, Genesis 2:7 tells Jews when and how life begins. And here I'll get a little more academic, since getting the words exact is pretty important, right? God forms the human, called Ha-Adam, from the dust of the earth, which is Ha-Adamah. All kinds of great wordplay in the Hebrew Bible. Man literally comes from the dust, right? But it's not until God breathes the breath of life, nismat, into the human form that the human becomes a fully living human being, called lenefesh. And you see, here's one place where Jews and Christians differ, because they simply use different passages from the Torah to support their opinions. For example, most Christians take their idea on the beginning of life from Psalms, particularly Psalms 139, where David writes that God, quote, formed my inward parts in my mother's womb and knew me before I was born. Likewise, Christianity derives their concept of morality, that concept of original sin, from Eve's disobedience in the garden, eating the apple and all that. Jews take their morality from God asking Cain where his brother is, and Cain asking if he's supposed to be his brother's keeper. Same book, different uses. Now, as for abortion, the closest God gets to addressing it directly comes in Exodus 21, where Moses explains that if two people fight and one of them hits a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, then the one who caused the miscarriage is financially liable to the woman's husband. Remember, as I said, the Torah is the what, straight from God's mouth. But Torah doesn't explain the how or the why, which is why we need the Talmud. So what does it mean to die? Luckily, the Talmud has a whole book devoted to just women in childbirth that tells us that when someone dies, God leaves the parts behind that are not his. That is, the parts that were formed by the mother and the father. But God takes back his part from the once living being. He takes back the breath. As Rabbi Papa suggests, Jews should think of the physical body as of the deceased like so much trash. This body is worthless, remember, because it came from Adamah, from dust. The spirit is the important part. That's what's preserved and saved by God. So here we have a definition of life and a definition of death. And it's important that this definition of death is explained in the context of a miscarriage, which you'll notice is treated very differently from the death of the mother. Recall that the guilty party must pay the husband for the loss, but only if the mother is unharmed. Well, Doc B, what happens if the mother dies? Great question, dear audience. You're in good company. Rashi, probably the greatest rabbi ever, explains in his commentary on Exodus that this passage means that the death of the unborn and the death of the mother are actually two different kinds of things. He says that if the mother remains unscathed after the fracas, then there's been no capital crime committed. In other words, there's been no murder, which would be the highest offense. If the fetus is miscarried, then the payment is for lost fruit, or what Rashi elsewhere calls a payment of, quote, property for property. But if the woman's death follows, then life must be paid for with life, which overrides the monetary payment for the lost fruit. I realize that this sounds all very legal, but rabbis were also the judges way before we had law schools, so they kind of had to be. So, Rashi is the first of the rabbis to declare that the life of the mother and the status of the fetus are not to be considered the same thing, legally. In fact, the Talmud has another passage about dealing with tricky births, specifically breech births, which were almost always fatal in the ancient world. The earliest rabbis declare that if a fetus were to cause the death of the mother, then the fetus is considered, quote, the pursuer and the aggressor of the mother's life, which means that the fetus, if not already dead from being a breech birth, must be destroyed as if it had killed a living being, which the mother certainly is. This also means that the fetus, since it is not yet taken in the breath of life, because it's breech, is not a living human being and has no rights to life like the mother. The Talmud tells us that the destruction of an unborn life is certainly a grave offense and not one to be taken lightly, but it is not a capital offense. Now, the second most important rabbi, Maimonides, even goes so far as to say that if such a birth would result in the death of the mother, it is the duty of the rabbis to cut up the fetus in the womb in order to save the mother's life. But if the head has already emerged, Maimonides says that we're dealing with a situation of life for life, in which case we must strive to save both lives equally. Now, why this mention of the head, you might ask? In order to understand what Maimonides meant, the Mahanahayim says that if the head has already emerged, then the chances for the fetus to take a breath must be honored. Jews always err on the side of life. If the fetus's head has emerged, then they assume it has taken a breath and is thus a living being. Breech births don't afford this option. Yet, it becomes obvious that even this was not a hard and fast rule for the Jews, because in a later law code, remember, there are lots of these, they declare that the viability of the life of the child cannot be established until 30 days after birth, which certainly makes sense with the precarious conditions a newborn faces during its first few weeks of life without soap, right? But if the child lives past 30 days, says the Hoshem Mishpat, it's considered nefesh, a living being. And if you're wondering why I've not provided the slides for the last two law codes, it's because they've never been translated into English, and so it would just be gibberish up here to most of us, right? But to bring us back full circle to my title, the responsa clarifies even further what a threat to the mother's life entails. The Yoredea goes so far as to say that abortion of the unborn in this way is required, not just for the physical threat to the mother's life, but also as a mental threat to the mother's life, which is a pretty forward way of thinking a couple thousand years ago. As far back as the Talmud, the health of the Jewish body has always been conceived of in holistic terms. What the rabbis define by one's health is their total health, both their physical and mental well-being. This is why the responses say that if the birth of the child would threaten the mother's health, be that physical or emotionally by causing undue stress or unnecessary financial hardship, for example, then the existing life must be preserved. The Talmud and law codes all emphasize life above all else. For example, while Jews are forbidden from many acts on the Sabbath, including all forms of work, each of the law code confirms that if a life is in peril, then the laws of the Sabbath are to be set aside. Hundreds of times the law codes stress that one should perform the laws of the Sabbath only if they don't cause unnecessary harm to the individual performing them. In this way, children, pregnant women, the elderly are not required to fast on the Sabbath if their health would suffer. If working on the Sabbath would save life, then in fact the laws of the Sabbath must be violated and you must save that person's life. Nefesh above all else. One's health is physical and mental. Now, Shulchan Aruch, often thought of by many non-Orthodox Jews as the strictest of the law codes, especially with regards to the treatment of women, even declares that during a pregnancy, a woman is to be considered a critically ill patient. Any violation of the law of the Sabbath is permitted for whatever she requires. Again, pretty liberal thinking for the most ultra of the Orthodox, right? Such a holistic and comprehensive view on life is poetically rendered in one of the most famous passages of the Talmud, which I will use to close this talk. The Talmud says that whoever destroys a soul, a living being endowed with the breath of life, is considered to have destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves one life has saved an entire world. Life is infinite. It's beyond our ability to quantify or to measure. Saving one life saves all the life that will emanate from that life. But destroying a single life destroys the future. So when the Hoosier Jews for Choice declare that their right to practice their religion is actually being violated by banning abortions, they draw on thousands of years of precedent. If the life of the pregnant woman is in jeopardy, and it is in childbirth, according to even the most conservative of the Jewish law codes, then aborting the fetus to save the life of the mother is not only required, not saving the life of the woman is considered a capital offense, one to be paid for with life for life. The question of abortion for Jews is not about ending the life of the unborn. It's about saving the sacred life of a living person. The soul is given to a creature of flesh only once its head has emerged from the birth canal and met its God face to face and received the divine gift of breath, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach. Shalom and thank you.
Can we open this to questions?
Absolutely.
Does anyone like to ask a question or comment?
Simple, right? And again, not one you would sort of anticipate from one of the Judaic religions, saying that actually abortion is absolutely required in certain instances. Over here and then Briggs?
So where did it go? Like, they took it to court, you said the ACLU, or did it?
Still there.
It's still there.
It's still there. If I remember right, I want to say it was the end of last week, there was still another continuation. So we're still at that point where we're waiting.
I know you're not an attorney, but do you think it, like, do you think they'll appeal it? They'll go before appellate and does this have any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? To like go all the way and make it different?
Or use a Jewish word, chutzpah.
Yeah, it does.
Does it have any chutzpah to go the distance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does, because I don't know if you know, but there's literally a similar thing that happened on the same day in Kentucky with another group of five Jewish women and one Muslim woman, for example. And so they started small right after the trigger laws started, but given that it's popping up in a lot of these states, and it's a lot of Jews and Muslims who are saying, look, this may be the Christian way of looking at things, but it's not our way of looking at things. So you're actually violating our First Amendment right to the freedom of religion. So yeah, my guess is, though, it's probably going to go the way a lot of these things go. It'll be overturned, and then they'll appeal the overturn, and it's just going to be this ping pong table, back and forth. Overturn, go up another court, overturn, go up another court, overturn, go up another court. So that's just my guess. Yeah.
I was going to ask, are there any large groups of Jewish people who are pro-life, and if so, what is their argument with all of this being present?
Not as such. Again, the idea of pro-life and pro-choice is very much like a Christian way of thinking about it, and the Jews don't see it in those sort of terms. It literally comes down to, are you an Orthodox observant Jew or are you not? And if you are, you follow the Orthodoxy. But if you're not, then, you know, believe what you want to believe and do what you want. I mean, that's the beauty. The Jews are just like any other group of people, right? There's some Jews that are religious and go every day, and there's some Jews that have no idea what the Talmud is, right? So yeah, that's why I say it sort of plays out that way, that, you know, if you're an observant Jew, if you're a religious Jew, then you follow the religious law that we have. Other than that, you're free to do whatever you want.
I kind of have two questions, but I wanted to clarify. Are you talking about like nationwide, like it specifically what's happening in Indiana?
The context for what I was talking about is in Indiana, but I'm talking about Jews, whether they're Jews here or, you know, Jews in Yemen.
Because I know that there's also, I don't know it straight off the bat, because I don't know if this was related or not, but I know there was a county judge who also, with specifically Indiana, she called out, the only reason I know is because my county did it. Owen County judge called out and said, hey, actually, Indiana banning abortion is unconstitutional, and I didn't know if there was any connection or if like one would help the other, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, I hadn't heard that. I just knew the Marion County one because that's kind of the de facto one for the state itself. But yeah, that's go Owen County.
I know, it's the first time. We have two judges and one did it.
You got to start somewhere. There was, yeah, hand over here.
Are you aware of any other court cases that have come up specifically surrounding the Jewish view on abortion previous to Dobbs? Do you know if there's any other time that this has come into, you know, that these have kind of rubbed up against each other, or is this the first time?
I don't know of any before, definitely not before Roe v. Wade, for example. There were before Roe v. Wade, but Roe v. Wade pretty much took care of that for the last 50 years.
What were the arguments before Roe v. Wade again? Just people coming and saying, hey, this should be legalized to support our religion? Is that what?
They sort of lucked out because they got to piggyback right on the heels of, it's a long day, I'm losing my nouns at this point, the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so they found themselves in nice company with lots of other groups of people who were thinking the same way. And so it's a way that they can just piggyback on a bigger social trend and go with it that way. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, again, I really appreciate everybody showing up. It takes a lot to sacrifice a night of Netflix, like, believe me. I'm completely with you there, so this does mean a lot. And yeah, keep in the loop, and we've got another talk. Catherine's here. She'll be talking in, what, half a month?
16.
Yeah, like 2-3 weeks. Yeah, and she's even better than me, so. So yeah, hope to see you at more of these events. Again, if anybody wants any, like I said, this was sort of like the non-academic view. If you want citations for any of this stuff, I tried to put them up on the screen. I'm more than happy to give you those references. But yeah, just email me and let me know. I'd be happy to do it. Okay? Thanks again, everybody.
Thank